This is from a channel called Unpacked, and they kind of are in the lane of Rudy Israel and folks in that world, okay?
This is my home. Yep, I'm lucky enough to live in one of the most beautiful and contested countries in the world. Want to send me a fruit basket or a letter bomb? Yeah, I read the YouTube comments. You can address it to Yirmiyahu Danzig, Israel. Ancient country, ancient name. Pretty simple. Or is it? Because this region has been known by quite a few names over the centuries. 100 years ago, a letter addressed to Israel probably wouldn't have been delivered. After all, the place had a different name back then. Palestine.
So 100 years ago, Israel was called Palestine, okay? Now, I have friends that are Palestinians. I spent time with Palestinians there when I was there in November. I spent time with Palestinian refugees. I spent time with Palestinian pastors. I spent time with Palestinian Christians that run the oldest tattoo shop in the world, okay? So this is important to note. Where do we start the timeline? So 100 years ago, this place was called Palestine, okay? And the question of are there Palestinians is a bit more complicated, okay? Because Palestine or Palestinians, Palestine was often used to refer to Jews, okay? So I'm going to give you guys a bit, this is, I think, a good just condensed history lesson, and I'll give you guys as much additional information as possible, and then we'll go into the Christians in Gaza.
It's all over the official documents, the newspapers, the money. So what gives? Did Israel take over a country that was once called Palestine? And if it was once called Palestine, then why is it called Israel today? The name Israel, which has confusingly been used to refer to a place, a person, an entire nation, traces back to the Hebrew Bible. Remember the patriarch Jacob, son of Isaac, grandson of Abraham? Jacob had a big family, and his descendants became known as the children of Israel, or Israelites. We Israelites trace this name back to a fateful wrestling match described in chapter 32 of Genesis. One night, Jacob is attacked by a mysterious, possibly divine figure. They wrestle.
Now, we're all familiar with the story, right? This is in Genesis. This is when Israel wrestles with potential, if you're a Christian, potentially Jesus, right? The angel of the Lord, okay?
Until daybreak. As the sun rises and the fight comes to an end, Jacob demands a blessing from his attacker. Instead, the attacker gave him a new name, one that means he who wrestles with God. In Hebrew, Israel. In English, Israel. Pretty fitting for a country this contentious, huh? But the Hebrew Bible isn't our only record of the name Israel. In the 13th century BCE, an ancient Egyptian pharaoh named Merneptah commissioned a stele to record various military victories. A stele, by the way, is basically a stone monument with writings or drawings. Among those victories was Merneptah's defeat of Israel and Canaan, another name for the
Here, he's going to 12th century BCE, where Israel is used to describe this land. Okay, so for all folks that are like, Israel never existed, it's all made up history, right? That's kind of the narrative you're going to get from the Palestinian side. There's more than enough in the archaeological record that this was the land of Israel at some point in time in history. It goes back to, when do you want to start the timeline?
Same land. Yeah, this place has had a lot of names throughout it. Merneptah's scribes don't give us much beyond the name, but later stelae are a bit more forthcoming. The Tel Dan stele, which dates back to the 9th century BCE, refers to a war with the king of Israel and the house of David, which suggests two things. One, Israel is probably a place named after the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob, who lived there. And two, there's archaeological evidence dating back to the 9th century BCE for the biblical account of an Israelite king named David. David's kingdom split into two around 930 BCE. The northern kingdom retained the name Israel, but the southern kingdom, which was home to Jerusalem, took on a different name that starts cropping up in the archaeological record around 730 BC.
So yeah, Ben Shapiro is a Ashkenazi Jew. His wife is a Sephardic Jew. Okay, so Sephardic Jews come from places like Jordan. They were also exiled and displaced, right? So there's a lot of people that have been displaced, both Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews. Okay, so like my friend Rabbi Eduardo, he'll trace his lineage back to Sephardic Jews, folks that went through Spain, folks that came over through the Puerto Rico and places like that. A lot of Spanish Jews went through Spain. They were exiled from Spain or forced to convert to Catholicism at one point. Those folks are Sephardic Jews, and then you got Ashkenazi Jews, which are primarily the victims of the Holocaust. Okay, and again, the Holocaust is really important to remember in this, because if you've ever been to a Holocaust museum, you've probably heard the paradigm that they live, the mentality they have is never again. That is the mentality that they're coming from. Never again. That is so ingrained in the zeitgeist of Israelis, right? And so when you see what's about to happen in Gaza, it's because of that mentality, right? So they're not fighting for ideology or religion. In their mind, they're fighting for their very existence. They're fighting for their very existence. So it's a little different.
BCE, Judah. Both the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah were home to Jacob's descendants. But in the 8th century BCE, when the Assyrians destroyed the kingdom of Israel, only the kingdom of Judah survived. Its territory became known as Judea, the Greek word for Judah. And its people became known as, wait for it, Jews. So the names Israel and Judah are ancient. They denote places where Jews established a monarchy and enjoyed a continuous presence from at least the 12th century BCE until today. And that is why the name Israel, or Judea, is so important to Jewish people. It reaffirms the link between our history and our present, between our peoplehood and our land. Our Bible, our liturgy, our poetry, our life cycle events, all refer to us as the children of Israel. And for over 3,000 years, our home has been the land of Israel and the province of Judea, with Jerusalem at its heart. Even the conquerors and occupiers of the region knew it as Judah. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar referred to his seizure of Judah. The conquering Persians kept the name, assimilating Yehudah into their empire. And when the Greeks and Romans came along, they too referred to the province as Judea. But Israel and Judea aren't the only names on record.
Okay, so this is where it gets complicated, right? Here are the other names, and where we're going to get the name Palestine from. Okay, now there's a couple different theories on where the name came from. Okay, but this is important.
In the reign of King David, the Jews' biggest enemy was a group called the Philistines, who came from a place known in Hebrew as Paleshit, and in ancient Egyptian as Palesit, and in ancient Syrian as Palashtu. This is starting to sound a little familiar. Could the Israelites' ancient enemy, the Philistines of Paleshit, hold the key to the name Palestine? The answer is probably. Scholars believe that the Philistines made their way from somewhere around here to here in the 12th century BCE, roughly around the time that Israel started showing up in the archaeological record. Because they left no written records, everything we know about the Philistines comes from the folks they warred with: Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans, and of course, the Israelites. Unsurprisingly, none of the records are flattering. In fact, in modern English, the word Philistine literally means an uncultured bozo. Harsh. And no, that's not a racist term, because the Philistines aren't around anymore. They disappeared from written records after Nebuchadnezzar destroyed their cities in the 6th century BCE. The folks living in the region today are not descendants of the Philistines, so you can go ahead and use the term Philistine without worrying that you're going to offend anyone. Still, our ancient friends, the Philistines, did leave a few things behind other than their bad reputation, like pottery, temples, shrines, and a name, which in Greek became Palestine. In the 5th century BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus took a little road trip around the Levant. In his travelogue, he described a place that sounds quite a bit like modern-day Israel.
Okay, and so this is where a lot of folks will have the narrative from, I guess this would be the more Zionist Christian narrative. The Herodotus renames Israel, Palestine, to mock the Jews there because their enemies, the Philistines. Okay, this is one theory for the name.
Except he calls it Syrian Palestine. What gives? Okay, maybe he didn't use the name Israel because the northern kingdom no longer existed, but the southern kingdom sure did. Why wouldn't he call it Judah or Judea like everyone else? There's a couple of explanations. The first, popularized by historians like Louis Feldman and Bernard Lewis, assert that Herodotus was referring only to the coast, that part of the region where the Philistines lived in cities like Jaffa, Ashkelon, and Gaza. According to Feldman, Herodotus didn't venture much farther inland to the majority Jewish province of Judea. This is backed by the 1st century historian Josephus Flavius, who says that the Greeks called part of that country Palestine. But other historians like Martin Noth and David Jacobson claim that Herodotus' use of Palestine refers to the whole of the region. They believe that the Greek name Palestine is actually an alternate name for the land of the Jews. Okay, remember when we explained the etymology of Israel as one who wrestles? In ancient Greek, the word for wrestler is palaistes.
Now, this is the part that, again, people are missing. Everyone goes, oh, it's because Herodotus wanted to mock the Jews, and so that's why he called it Palestine as a nod to the Philistines. Here, it's actually not that. Wrestlers is Palestines. Did you guys catch that?
Sounds an awful lot like Palestine. Could the Greeks have called this land Palestine as a literal translation of the Hebrew word Israel rather than an explicit reference to the Philistines? After all, Herodotus' description of the folks living in Palestine makes them sound quite a bit like Jews. For one, he comments on the fact that the folks in Palestine were circumcised, like Jews. And later writers like Ovid talk about the 7th-day feast that the Syrian of Palestine observes. Sounds a lot like the Jewish tradition of Shabbat. So the name Palestine stuck around, and its exact parameter is ambiguous. In some sources, it's mentioned in tandem with Judea. In others, it's referenced as a land of Jews, and in numerous sources, it's paired with Syria. But then the Romans came along. Cue scary music. Once the Romans took control of Judea, things got really ugly because the Jews fought the Romans bitterly. So bitterly, in fact, that the Romans destroyed the Jewish Holy Temple in 70 CE and carted many Jews away from their home in chains.
So this is the destruction of the temple. This is, if you're reading the chapters, Matthew 24, a lot of what partial preterists hold to is that Jesus was prophesying the destruction of the temple. Okay, so a lot of what we believe, some of us believe, happened in the beginning chapters of Revelation, when Nero is actually prophesying this event of happening. Okay, or it had happened, and that's what Revelation was about. Okay, is the destruction of the temple.
But the flame of rebellion smoldered. In the 2nd century CE, a Jewish warrior named Shimon bar Kokhba led a strike force against the Roman occupier. He and his guerrilla army gave the occupiers hell. But the Romans had the resources of an entire empire. They crushed the Bar Kokhba revolt and renamed the land of the Jews to Syria Palestina. No one knows exactly who chose that name, but historian Louis Feldman suggests it was the Emperor Hadrian. So assuming it was Hadrian, why choose that name? Well, there are two possible reasons. First, the Romans, Hadrian included, were big fans of the Greeks. And the Greeks had used the name Palestine for hundreds of years to refer to different parts of the land we now know as Israel. So as Hadrian consolidated his territory, it made sense to adopt a name that had been used by the Greeks. The second reason is both more nefarious and harder to prove. The historian Louis Feldman writes that the name change was deliberately intended to sever all Jewish connection from the land, replacing Judea or Israel with the name of the Jews' ancient enemy, the Philistines. That would be pretty on brand for Hadrian, whose early sympathies towards the Jews quickly turned into a vicious anti-Semitism.
So again, here's three different ideas of how it could have been named that. It could have been the translation of the one wrestler to Palestine. It could be this gentleman in terms of the Roman dude intentionally mocking it. There's multiple ways that the name became that, okay? That it's not just one version of it. And this is a Jewish source, by the way, that you guys are hearing from.
The guy built a pagan temple on the ruins of the Jewish Holy Temple, banned Torah study, Shabbat, circumcisions in Jewish courts, and forbade the remaining Jews of the region to enter Jerusalem except for one day of the year. So yeah, not the Jews' biggest fan. True, Hadrian didn't leave behind a diary with inscriptions like, "Today I renamed Judea to Syria Palestina," just to stick it to the Jews. But given his record on Jewish people, he may well have appreciated the resonance of ethnically cleansing the region of Jews, whose rebellions had been a thorn in his side for years, and then renaming their home after their historic enemy. Whoever was responsible for the name change and whatever their reason, they certainly made an impact on history.
Oh yeah, because this is where a lot of the contention comes from. Who was there first? Whose land is it, right?
Because the name stuck around. When Arab armies swept through the Levant in the 7th century CE, they adopted the name into Arabic as Palestine.
Okay, did you guys catch that?
When Arab armies swept through the Levant in the 7th century CE, they adopted the name.
So this is the spread of Islam now. Okay, so the Romans were there, then the Islamic Empire conquers it, renames it that.
Adopted the name into Arabic as Palestine.
Okay, and then what happened? What happened after this? Then the Crusades came. Islam spread. Islam took this part of the world, right? Because Muhammad claimed to be on a carpet ride mission to Palestine, okay, even though he probably never been there, or Jerusalem, right? And then the Crusades happened. Rome goes back in, takes the land, the Holy Land.
As the region traded hands through the centuries, passing to Arab dynasties and Christian crusaders and the Ottoman Empire, it kept the name Palestine. And it's
the Ottoman Empire, okay, if you guys don't know, the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, you have the Armenian genocide, which inspired the Holocaust, okay? That was done by the Ottoman Empire towards the Christians, okay? And towards the end of the Ottoman Empire is when it really hit the fan between World War I and World War II.
Its inhabitants, Arabs, Samaritans, and Jews alike, were known as Palestinians.
Arabs, Samaritans, and Jews alike, remember, parable of the Good Samaritan, Arabs, Muslims, and Jews alike were all called what? Palestinians. That once upon a time, when you said Palestinian, it had to do with your region, not an ethnic identity. Are you guys tracking? Okay, some of this stuff has been appropriated intentionally to create this. These folks were all there. Now, when we get into the more recent history, that's where it gets really bad.
This is one of those crazy historical facts, but some folks even call diaspora Jews Palestinians. Like German philosopher Immanuel Kant, whose 18th century book, Anthropology from a Pragmatic Point of View, criticized the Palestinians living among us with a boatload of anti-Semitic stereotypes.
So Kant was calling Palestinians Jews. You get it? Okay, so it's not just this one specific group.
So yeah, it's true. Modern-day Israel was established in a region that was once known as Palestine. Though there was never a self-governing Arab country named Palestine, the region's inhabitants were known as Palestinians.
Never a self-governing country known as Palestine. Never a self-governing, meaning that the ethnic aspect of Arabs being interchangeable with Palestinians that's relatively modern. Relatively modern. So this whole free Palestine and Palestinians are Arabs, that's current. That's not historical. Okay, and even the Arabs there are a combination of Arabs, Turks, and Jews. Meaning that what a lot of these folks that have been there were probably Jews who converted to Christianity, possibly, then were taken over by Muslims when they came through, right? Then the Crusaders got it. Then you see what I'm saying? That the land has been passed over multiple times, the Ottoman Empire, right? So these folks are not like, oh, Palestinians are one specific thing. This is a intermingled group of people here. That's what makes this so much more complicated.
That's why the Jewish newspapers and money and immigration certificates I showed you at the start of this video refer to Palestine. But look closely at those two letters right there. Yep, that's shorthand for the region's other name, the one that had sustained the Jewish people through thousands of years of exile, the one that they'd used since the 12th century BCE, the one that represented their ancient connection to their homeland, Eretz Yisrael. No matter where they were in exile, the Jewish people turned towards Jerusalem and prayed for Eretz Yisrael, the home that fell in blood and fire 2,000 years ago, the home that rose again as a modern state in 1948, the home where I am lucky enough to live.
So hopefully that gives some context. Now, what happened after that? So it's under the Ottoman Empire. Then the British are trying to figure out what to do with it, and the British are the one that come up with this really goofy map where half of it is Israel, half of it is Palestine, right? Now, to be fair, at the time where the Zionist movement happened, and by Zionist movement, I just mean the desire to bring people, the Jewish people back to their land, okay? The land that they've inhabited, that they were scattered from. When that started, the Jews there was only about 10% of the population. So 100 years ago, there's only about 10% of Jews there. Yes, they were living there amongst Christians and Muslims, but there's only about 10% there, okay? Fast forward to now, and it's inverted. It's about 80 to 85% Jewish, and I want to say 10 to 15% Muslim, okay? So everything is flipped, okay? Now, how did that happen? Well, because there was a Zionist desire to get the Jewish people back into their Holy Land, on top of which you have the arrangement that the Arab nations didn't want no part of because of how goofy it got caught up. This was Palestine in terms of the Ottoman Empire, right? And then they divvy it up under this UN plan because the British were like, forget it. Remember, the British called it Palestine. Then they're like, forget it. We don't want anything to do with it. UN, you figure it out. 1947. It's 1947. You guys understanding why this date is significant. So they want to push all these Jews out there. So they create this goofy map where all of this is intertwined. Okay. Then what happens? Then there's the War of 1948. In the war, the Israelis destroy all the Arab nations that weren't cool with this map. And then they get more of it. Okay, they get more of it. And then there's another war, and they fight off multiple wars where the Israelis end up fighting off everybody, all the Arab nations, and they basically establish and go further and further out. They gave some of it back with the Sinai Peninsula. Gaza was connected to Egypt at one point, right? And so this entire region is extremely complicated. So when we're talking about a two-state solution, what they're really saying is, hey, we want two different governance. Now, why is that problematic? Well, because Gaza had their own elections in 2007, okay? Israel was in Gaza up until 2015. They decided to bounce. They wanted to get out of there. What does that mean? That means they left Gaza alone, except they created a blockade because they didn't trust them. So what happened? The more militant, radicalized Hamas sprouted up. Why is this significant? Well, because initially Israel and the United States was helping develop Hamas because before they turned an Israel a militant terrorist group. Same thing, by the way, with Osama bin Laden. That you can trace this back. This is also a fact, right? So a lot of times America is trying to establish allegiances, and then these guys became radicalized Muslims, right? In terms of what happened with Osama bin Laden, same thing happened with Gaza. And so this part of the country becomes the Gaza Strip. They pull out, okay? Now, the West Bank is different. The West Bank is completely different. Why is the West Bank different? The West Bank is different because 200,000, there's about, I want to say 3 million Palestinians that live in the West Bank, and about 200,000 of them drive into Israel every day to work. They got work permits. They go to Israel. There's settlements between Muslim and Arab and Jewish neighborhoods. Right now, the tensions in the West Bank, they claim, are affecting what's happening in Gaza because more and more of the Jewish people are taking over more and more of the Arab neighborhoods. They're saying that's what's been causing. So when you hear all these flare-ups, it's because of stuff like this, right? And it's been going on for a long time, Okay. And it sucks because who was there first? What timeline do you want to start with? Right? Yeah. Gentrification is another way you can describe it. Absolutely. Who was there first? What timeline do you want to start with? Where do we start? Was it 3,000 years ago? Was it 100 years ago? Right? Now, as far as I know, there was no ethnic Palestinian identity up until all this stuff sprouted up and up until they started to kind of use this as a way to pin people against each other. Okay. Now, Israel is not perfect in any of this, by the way. Israel has definitely been heavy-handed in some of their responses to some of this stuff, right? And their logic is, well, what do you want us to do? There's terrorists that are trying to wipe us out. The Hamas organization in Gaza doesn't see Israel as having a right to exist. Iran doesn't see Israel as having a right to exist, okay? Lebanon, all the bordering towns. Remember, this is the only country in the Middle East that's an actual democracy. This is the only country in the Middle East where the Christian population is increasing, okay? And they're also very specific of wanting to have a Jewish ethno-state. You see how many of these things can be true at the same time? So yes, Christians aren't always treated fairly here, right? And if you look at what's been happening with Armenians in the Christian sector, Armenians who are Christians, myself, right? When we were there, we went to a beautiful, beautiful Armenian restaurant in the Christian Quarter. Like a couple weeks after we left, that was overran by extremist Jews that don't get along with the Christians. You would think the Christians and the Jews have more in common. Oddly enough, that's not it. The Christians and the Arabs have more in common. Plot twist, right? Like, so that's what I'm saying. Like, this is all complicated. And when it really started getting more and more tense is after their last election, when a more conservative government got elected. Netanyahu came back. What does that mean? Netanyahu conservative, not conservative in the sense of we're pro-life and small fiscal government. That's not what conservative means there. Conservative means there we want an ethno-state. We're going to have a bigger surveillance state. We're going to control what's happening. Okay, this is not the same thing. And who's a huge constituency of the more quote unquote more conservative folks? It's the ultra Orthodox Jews. The ultra Orthodox Jews, they don't serve in the military. Okay, they don't serve in the military. They're not secular. They just pray and read Torah all day. Their wives work. You know what I'm talking about? The ultra. Okay, so when you talk about conservative, they want more of an ethno-Jewish state, less of a pluralistic society where Muslims and Christians and Jews can all get along. And that's what happened. And so this tension all boiling up has been going on for a year now, right? It's been going on for a year now. And this region is that they've been fighting over this for a long time. And here's the truth, man. Here's the truth. Palestinians don't always get the best treatment there. The Jews are heavy-handed sometimes with how they treat the Palestinians. And by the way, and some of the extremists, how they treat Christians. But from the Jewish perspective, what is the alternative? What are they going to do? You got Hamas claiming that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. The West Bank is a bit more moderate with the Fatah organization, right? And so that therein lies all of this tension and all of this brewing over. And yes, the 6-Day War absolutely was a miracle. There's been so many wars. There's been so many flare-ups. But all of this is after they left. And so all the people that are like, liberate Palestine, that's what happened. They left Gaza. They bounced. They let them have their own elections. They elected Hamas. Whether those were legitimate elections or not, I don't know. But they elected a terrorist organization. Okay, that's what happened there. So, having said that, these people are not a monolith. That's what we got to be careful as Christians. These folks are not a monolith. Everyone who is Palestinian is not a Muslim. Everyone who is Palestinian is also not a terrorist. Okay, that a lot of folks just want peace. Okay, they just want peace. So we don't want to oversimplify this sort of stuff because it's not simple. It's not. Okay? We see according to the Bible that prayer is extremely important in terms of us being transformed from the inside out when we get aligned with God's will. I want you guys to implement these spiritual disciplines in your day-to-day life. And the only way I've been able to do this consistently is through writing down my prayers in a prayer journal that does a few things. One, it allows me to reflect and come to God humbly and ask Him to move on my behalf. And two, it allows me to document my prayers, which ultimately helped me remember the very things that I was praying for and see the hand of God tangibly in my life when He answers them. So I would urge you, consider writing down your prayers. It could be in a blank notebook. It could even be on your phone. Or you could check out the one I personally designed and used for my own quiet time and spiritual discipline that I think will be a huge blessing. It's the exact structure and system that I've used for years to pray and be more consistent in my spiritual disciplines. And here's the thing, with the hope to create a prayer movement, we've made the PDF version of this prayer journal completely free. So to get the PDF of our prayer journal completely for free, go to blessgodpdf.shop now.